If you find yourself running out of money come the end of the week, or maybe you struggle when those large bills come in, or perhaps you just want to get a better handle on your finances, then having a budget can really help you with this. It's helped me, and that's what I'm going to be talking you through in this video. Quick disclaimer, I'm not a licensed financial advisor, nor am I a licensed tax advisor. You should seek the assistance of a professional before you make any changes to your financial position. I had a boss once that said to me, you can only manage what you can measure. And that really stuck with me. If you have no concept on what you spend on food, fuel, eating out, or other forms of entertainment each week, then how can you possibly expect to be able to manage it? So for the first 2 to 3 weeks, all I want you to do is document what you're spending your money on. You can do this on a notebook or on your phone. And if you don't feel like documenting it, then download your bank statement for the last month and go down and write next to each item what you have spent that money on. This will help you massively when it comes time to pulling your budget together. I'm going to show you how to pull a budget together simply using Excel, but you don't have to use a computer. You can use a notebook. That's just as easy. Just make sure you have a calculator handy. So I want you to start by writing your income at the top of the worksheet and the time period. So if you get paid weekly, type in weekly at the start of the worksheet and then type in your pay. So according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the average Aussie takes home about $1,300 per week. And then what I want you to do is start listing out your weekly expenses. So not all your expenses, just your weekly expenses in order from highest priority. So the most important expenses for you to live. So things like rent, mortgage, accommodation, and food, things like that. And the lowest priority down below. And the idea is that if you're really struggling, those lowest priority items are the ones that you first cut or adjust in your budget. Now, a key tip here, exclude eating out or Uber Eats from your food line. Those things are expensive and groceries and making your own meals at home is much cheaper. We'll revisit this later on in the budget. Now, I'm going to include lines in my budget for investment and savings. What some people do is include this as an optional. See how much money you have left over at the end of the week, then maybe you save some money. But for me, these are non-negotiable. Key features of generating wealth and creating financial freedom are investing money and savings. And I'm going to leave a link in the description down below because I've made some other videos on these topics. What I want you to do next is start listing out your monthly expenses. So things like your phone bill, subscriptions, and insurance. And you'll see how I've got the monthly expenses set out. They are slightly off center. That's because our budget is based off a weekly column. So what I need to do to convert these monthly expenses into weekly expenses is divide them by 4 because there's generally 4 weeks in a month. So you can do this process again for quarterly expenses, but make sure you change the number you're dividing by to convert those quarterly expenses into a weekly expenses for our budget. But I definitely want you to do annual expenses because these are the large bills that roll in that you're not seeing that often and can really hurt. So things like your car registration. And again, for annual expenses, you divide that number by 52. Once you have all those numbers set out, you then have all your costs converted to a weekly equivalent along with your income number. And then if you sum that number down the bottom, that will be your leftover money that you have. So it's at this point where you make a decision, what else is really important to me for my health and well-being? So if you want to allocate some funds to Uber Eats or to eating out or to catching up with friends, include some more lines in your budget to account for those amounts. Now, if your number is negative down the bottom once you sum them all up, this means you are spending more money than what you are earning, which is not a good outcome and won't be sustainable for very long. This is where you revisit your budget, looking at those lower priority items to see what you can cut or cut down on. Now, I want you to sum up all your expenses, excluding your income. This is the money that needs to be put aside in order for you to cover your bills as they come in. Now, where you should put this money is debatable. You could put it into an offset account if you have a mortgage, but whatever you do, just put it into a separate account that's not your everyday transaction account. Then, as the bills come rolling in, you already have this money set aside and ready to go to pay the bill, which makes you well prepared and should alleviate any stress. So that pretty much sums up the budget for one. What I'll move on to now is how you do a budget for 2 people or a dual income scenario. And the very first step in setting up a budget for 2, can you guess? Involves a conversation with your partner on how you're going to pay for the bills. Now, if you're earning a similar income, it might be quite easy to split all the bills 50-50 down the middle. However, if one partner is earning more than the other, then you may adopt a different approach. So I've now set up our second person here, and this would be an example where we've decided to split all the bills 50-50 down the middle, with the exception of a few personal items. So you guys might decide that there are certain expenditures that each person should pay themselves. So for this example, things like gym membership, if you each have a different gym membership with a different cost, I've put different numbers in there, and I've put 100% against that item, which means each person will pay the full price of their own gym membership. You'll see most of the other percentages are 50%, meaning that the bill's just going to be split 50-50 down the middle. Another couple of items that where you might choose to pay for it yourself in full is like a phone bill. Everyone has their own phone nowadays. And perhaps if you're each running a separate car, you might have different car insurance or car registrations that each person will pay separately. So once you've put in the percentages, I've put in the numbers here for person 2, then all you have to do is multiply the number by the percentage. And then you do the same for person 2. Multiply the number by the percentage. So then you'll see here these two bottom numbers, 529 and 543. These are the sum of each partner's portion of the expense for the week. Okay, so what would need to happen that each week, this amount of money would need to be put aside, as we discussed earlier, in a separate account, a bills account, maybe a joint bills account, a mortgage offset account. So when the bills come rolling in, this money is set aside and ready to go to pay the bill. In another example where, say, person 1 and person 2 earn different incomes, another way you might decide to split the bills is in proportion to your income with regards to the partnership. So here we have person 1 earning 1,300, person 2 earning 800. I've pulled these numbers off to the side here, and then I've summed them. Now I've divided each number by the total, meaning that person 1 earns 62% of the income from the partnership, and person 2 earns 38% of the income for the partnership. So you then may decide that each person will pay their bills in proportion with those percentages. So what you would simply do then is change the percentage over here, meaning person 1 will pay, for the most part, 62% of the bills, and person 2 will pay 38% of the bills. Then you'll see the allocations down below just change a bit. Or equally, you may decide if one person is earning more than the other, then they may pay a higher percentage of the bills, much more than what their regular percentage would be. You just got to decide that amongst yourselves. But you can tinker with these percentages and find a mix that works for you. And if you really want to step it up, what you might do is add different categories to your expenses in your budget. Now, I haven't got many line items in my budget, so almost each line has its own category. But as your budget starts to increase and you have multiple line items in there, it then may be helpful to provide a generic category to group them. This can be helpful then in making decisions on what you need to cut or what you need to take a closer look at. So I've done that, and I've run a table off to the side here. And for example, 31% of my income is taken up by accommodation. So that's quite a high number. Now you can see that 3% of my income is taken up with personal expenditure, which is quite low. But if that number starts sneaking up 10, 20, 30, 40%, then at least this gives you a good indicator on what you might need to cut back on. Remember, you can only manage what you can measure. So if we now consider some industry best practices recommended by people like Scott Pape, otherwise known as the Barefoot Investor, he recommends a 60-20-20 rule, meaning that 60% of your income should be allocated to living expenses, which includes housing. 20% should be put aside for savings. And then 20% should also be put aside for things that make you smile, fun, entertainment, that sort of things. And within that 60% of living expenses, there's a general rule of thumb that you should spend more than 30% on housing. Spending more than 30%, it could be what's considered in mortgage stress. So if we consider this best practice to what my budget was at the start, where 42% of my income goes to my mortgage and a total of 80% of my income goes to living expenses, you can see this is far too high and outside of best practices. So when you are feeling a bit of financial stress, look to the budget. What expenses can I reduce? or what income can I increase? For me and my budget, we can see that my mortgage is far too high. So what options do I have here? I could potentially sell my house, try and rent somewhere, and then the difference between what my mortgage repayments are now and what my rent would potentially be, I could maybe invest that money or save that money or use that money on things that would make me smile. For me, I didn't really want to do that. We're in a bit of a housing crisis at the moment in Australia, so my family's quite settled. So what I'm trying to do, in addition to reducing some of our household expenditure, is increase my income. And I do that through investing. Any spare change that I get, I try and invest in stocks in the stock market and produce some passive income. And also develop side hustles like this YouTube channel. So if you've enjoyed the content that I've done today, please hit that like button. It doesn't cost you anything. If you want to see more from me, please consider subscribing. It would really help me out and help out the channel. And I'll see you in the next video.